happening on a Tuesday? I'm Craig Hoffman. This is the Hoffman Show. I am not the Hoffman Show. I mean, kind of, right? It's not just me. There's many people that work on the show, like at least 3 of us. 2 on a daily basis. I'll give my boss some credit too. All right, what a smashing start. So here's what I got today. I got the opportunity to make you really angry off the start of the show. Is that my music, by the way? Matt, that's on my end, or you're playing that?
That's mine.
Oh, okay. I think we're good with that. I think we can probably kill that. See, so one of the funny things, Matt Essig back in today, which now I'm gonna look over here because Matt's computer is not up for me to put on the screen. So Matt's gonna be a disembodied voice for the moment. One of the funky things about this show compared to the Roosters show is very specifically we are worried about copyright claims on this show. This is too much information for the general public, but YouTube gods, if you're watching, just know I've said my prayers for the day. So like when I cut the segments for YouTube, because if there's commercial music in them, they won't let me make money off of them.
They don't like that.
They don't like that very much. So we still want the show to sound like a radio show because at the end of the day, this is a radio show. It's a radio show that also happens to have an internet stream, which you can watch at youtube.com/@theteam980. However, the music, we tend to cut some of that out of the YouTube stream when we bring us in and out of break and when we do all the stuff. So
I'll keep it a little bit tighter for the YouTube overlords.
Just like I like my haircuts, Matt. We like a nice tight fade.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I like that analogy. I just absolutely smashed the start of the show. So, now that I feel like I'm back on track. Although, I will say this. Those that have been listening to the show with some frequency know I've gotten super into Formula One thanks to Drive to Survive. And, Essig, I don't know if you're a gamer at all, but the F1 video game came out, and I've been driving. I can't keep the car from smashing something off the start. I can't keep a car clean through turn 1 on a freaking video game. How do these dudes do it in real life with real cars? What? By the way, the track in Saudi Arabia, very thin.
Yeah.
That's for really nobody that's not an F1 fan. But I won the Bahrain Grand Prix. I've restarted the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix 7 or 8 times, at least, because I can't complete the freaking thing without crashing.
Have you gotten to Monaco yet?
I'm terrified of Monaco.
Yep. I imagine all those tight turns.
Sunday. So I still very much have been a learning beginner to figure it out how to drive the car phase. But, I mean, I'm doing automatic. I'm not even shifting gears.
You'll get there.
I'm on a PS5 controller.
Next thing you know, you're going to be buying the full kit with the wheel and the shifter and all that.
Nope. I think my wife would divorce me, and that sounds very bad. I love my wife a lot. I like being married to her. I don't think setting up a Formula One car in our living room is going to go over very well. I can't even drive it with the controller right now. Is it easier with the whole steering wheel set?
Apparently. I mean, for people that know what they're doing, yes, but...
Does it sound like I know what I'm doing?
It seems like you're a little bit of a beginner for the moment.
Yeah. I think I do need to spend a little bit more time in the practice sessions. I think that's also what I've learned. All right. I don't have time for the take that I was going to give you off the start of the show. But so I will tell you this. I'm going to take this call that we got from Lap here in a second before we go to break. And then I'm going to make everybody really angry, but I promise it's very important coming up in 5 minutes because I would like to revisit what Ted Leonsis said less than a year ago. Ted Leonsis talking about the Bradley Beal no-trade clause less than 1 year ago. I think it was July 8th of 2022. I will play that for you. We will revisit it and explore what changed coming up in 5 minutes. Real quick, though, hey, I just wrecked the start of the show, and Lap wanted to call anyway. So, Lap, I'll let you ride out this first segment. What's up, man? Lap!
Hey, what's up, Craig?
What's up, bro?
How you feeling about the trade, man?
I mean, I feel like it was something that had to happen. I feel like they got smashed by a no-trade clause, and I feel like I talked about it for 3 hours yesterday, and I'm going to talk about it for most of the next 2 hours and 45 minutes left on this show today.
Yeah, I didn't get to catch you, man, yesterday. It was a lot going on, but I just wanted to get your take. I'm cool with it. I mean, it gets us kind of out this situation earlier. I mean, we still got to figure out what we're going to do with Chris Paul. It sucks with Kuzma not coming back. I kind of figured that was going to be the case, and I was a little iffy on him before the Bradley Beal trade. That's why I wish we would have kept Rui. I'm a big Isaiah Todd fan, and I'm really upset that he was in there, and Goodwin, and I like both of them. I don't know what this team is doing. I mean, I know we don't really have a ton of options because whoever the new management is, they have to inherit it with Ernie Grunfeld and Tommy Shepard had to do. So it's just what is it? It is what it's going to be, man. But I'm just hoping young talent at some point, man, and eventually be a contender at some point.
It is going to be. I got to run because we're up against the break. But like, first of all, I will say this: if you missed any of the show yesterday, we are on demand everywhere. You can listen on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on the Odyssey app. If you would like to watch the show, just go to YouTube. You go to the 980 YouTube page. You go to our videos, and you can rewatch the entire show from yesterday. So if you want like kind of the full breakdown, I also cut up, I think, more on-demand content on my YouTube channel at Craig Hoffman from yesterday's show than I have any other show that we've done the last year. So there's a ton of like every angle on this that's available if you missed the show yesterday and you want, my take on it. We'll obviously continue to do more on it today. But I will say this. If you're worried about like an Isaiah Todd level player, you are worried about the wrong things. If you are worried about Jordan Goodwin in this trade, you are worried about the wrong things. Even if they turn out to be good players, there are a lot of that level players in the NBA. You had to get the deal done. They got the deal done. And so we move forward, and the Wizards are now going to go through a process that I described yesterday in much greater detail, and we will revisit with Keith Smith because he knows this process way better than me coming up at 5 o'clock. Spotrac's NBA salary cap analyst will join us at 5 o'clock. We will talk about kind of the multi-step process of acquiring young talent now for the Wizards because it is not going to be a direct path. Next, though, Ted Leonsis, 1 year ago, not even, said what about the no-trade clause in Bradley Beal? And then what changed? You'll hear from Leonsis a year ago, a retrospective with new perspective, next on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on that Odyssey app for the audio, video on YouTube, youtube.com/at the Team 980. Keith Smith's going to join us coming up at 5 o'clock. Spotrac NBA analyst Sebastian Salazar is also going to join us later in the show. Talk a little soccer. U.S. men's national team had a monster weekend. They also hired Greg Berhalter back. I certainly have some thoughts on that as well. And then we're also 30 days from the Women's World Cup. Why don't we know the U.S. roster yet? I'll see what Sebastian says about that, although I do think we're going to get that roster tomorrow, whatever that's worth. I wanted to rewind almost a full year ago. This is an idea I had yesterday during the show. It hit me while I was talking about the no-trade clause with Ted Leonsis and his involvement in giving Bradley Beal that. And I went, I wonder what he actually said a year ago about this. Like, what was the public comment? I should probably star that. Let's circle back to it tomorrow. And thus, it took me 30 seconds to go back in our archives because obviously we cut that very important piece of audio last year on this show. We were about 10 days into doing this show. The first thing that happened on this show, basically, we had Tommy Shepard on show number 1. I asked him, are you going to give Beal the contract? And he was basically like, yeah. And then a couple days later, they do. They officially signed him to the extension. And ultimately, they hold a press conference. I think it was on July 8th. After signing him unofficially on the 30th, the moratorium ends on like the 6th. Woohoo, press conference, big celebration. Bradley Beal's going to be a Wizard for life. Here we are, less than a year later. Bradley Beal is on his way to the Phoenix Suns. So what did Leonsis say about this no-trade clause? And I think before I hit play on this, it is important for me to reiterate something that I have. I don't know if you want to call it reported, stated. I'll call it reported. I will put that journalistic gravitas to this statement. I have reported, as have others, it's not original reporting by any stretch, that it was essentially Leonsis who gave Beal the no-trade clause. That it was not that for all of the mistakes that Tommy Shepard made, some of which feel like bigger mistakes now with the benefit of hindsight than they did at the time even. For all the mistakes that Shepard made. Tommy Shepard didn't want to give Bradley Beal a no-trade clause. He's the general manager. He doesn't want to handcuff himself. Why would he do that? No other player in the league has it. There is no precedent for that. But whether it was directly Leonsis or Leonsis handcuffing Shepard into it by saying, do whatever it takes to keep him happy, and then Beal going, well, let's see how far we can milk this, and then Shepard being like, well, it said do whatever to keep him happy, and he wants the no-trade clause, so I better not say no. Whether it was direct or indirect, that level of detail, I do not know. But it certainly was Leonsis, the feeling of those that were involved in around this extension. It was certainly a feeling like that was Leonsis' call. That's what I've been told. Take it for what it is. So, with that said, Leonsis asked last year at the press conference with Beal, what was the impetus? What's the reasoning? Why in the world did you give Bradley Beal the no-trade clause?
You have to trust me that I've come back from a lot of league meetings.
Okay, hold on. Anytime you start an answer as a billionaire with, you've got to trust me, I'm already skeptical, but continue, Mr. Leonsis.
You have to trust me that I've come back from a lot of league meetings. I'm back on my way out to Vegas, and several fellow NBA owners have said, I wish we had a relationship like you have with your players. There's a lot of movement, a lot of non-partnership that you see around the league, and for there to be a public statement that essentially says we have a player who wants to be here and serve out his contract, as do we, that allows your general manager to plan and to be able to have the confidence that your best player, your bedrock player, is a part of the process.
I'm going to pause it there because there are two possibilities on that. One, that is on some level genuine. And I've always thought Ted comes across as like a pretty empathetic, like real human being. So I tend to think that there is on some level a realistic something there to that I don't want to belittle. I don't want to, it's definitely not punching down. Like, I host a radio show. He's a billionaire who owns an NBA team. It's not punching down, but like, I don't want to feel like I'm taking pot shots at Leonsis, even though a lot of people in these seats do. And I've certainly probably taken a few over the years. But at the end of the day, like, the relationship element to sports is something that I think Leonsis genuinely cherishes. And sports would, for fans, be a lot better if everyone kind of acted that way. Because you could build things over years, which includes relationships with fans and like rooting for the same players, as opposed to this NBA that we have where 25, 30, 40% of the league, if not more, moves every off season. Like, good luck buying a jersey unless it's Giannis's or Jokic's. Like, if you're a Phoenix Suns fan who bought a Chris Paul jersey 2 years ago, you probably felt pretty good that Chris Paul would be there with Devin Booker and they would, they make the finals and like, yeah, Chris Paul is going to ride it out in Phoenix till he retires. Now he's maybe going to have a Wizards jersey printed for him, or he's going to have a buyout or whatever. If you're a Clippers fan, you might even get to use that old Chris Paul jersey that you put in the back of your closet. Like, it's crazy. There's a graphic going around that if Paul plays here in Washington, the Westbrook, Paul, John Wall trio will have just been traded for each other to the point that they've all played for the same teams. They will have all played for, obviously, Paul will have more, but they will have all played for Washington, Houston, and the Clippers. All three of Paul, Westbrook, and Wall. It's nuts. But the idea, the other side of that, the more cynical take on that, is that other owners think Ted Leonsis is a sucker, and they tell him, like, hey, man, great job with that no-trade clause. I wish we had that. And then they walk out of the room laughing, going, man, that guy stinks at business. That guy gave up all his leverage in the name of partnership. Because here's the flaw, right? Forget who thinks who is what. Let's just talk about the business. The business is you gave all of the leverage to Bradley Beal for nothing. Because he could still come to you and be like, I want out of here. And sure, you could enforce that leverage and be like, well, we don't want to trade you, so get out there and play. But that's not really how the league works. Star players force their way out, and they get their wishes because teams would prefer to not have disgruntled superstars that aren't going to perform at the high level and be poison in their locker rooms and all of those things. And so when Beal decides he wants out, you then can go like, okay, well, we'll trade you, but it ain't, and you can tell us where you prefer to go and we can try, but we're only going to do it if it works for us too. And in that case, even if Beal didn't necessarily, like, if he would have preferred Phoenix but would have been okay with Miami, he gives them maybe a list, and then the Wizards can at least be like, all right, hey, here's what we got. We got a deal on the table from Phoenix. That's not really on the table, though. So I know that's where you want to go, but they can't offer us enough. Miami can offer us more. It's far from your wife's family, which is something that's important to you. So if you're willing to play for the Sacramento Kings, we like their deal. We'll send you to Sacramento. You get the choice. Sacramento, Miami. Which one you want? And you at least then have two teams bidding against each other, if not, 3 or 4 other. And if you wanted to be hard about it, be like, well, you said you were committed for 5 years. You wanted out. Tough cookies. We're sending you to Minnesota. We're sending you to, Boston. We're sending you to wherever. It's not how it went down. He said, I want Phoenix. Phoenix is the only spot. And the Wizards had no choice because he actually had the power. So the idea that Leonsis does this in the name of partnership instead of realizing that it was just bad business, and Beal, of all people, had no way to remote. I mean, Steph Curry doesn't have the leverage to do this. Because here's the thing. NBA players can sign for more money with their team that it would be letting them go, right? The incumbent team, than they can with a new team. So all you have to do is look at Bradley Beal, Stephen Curry, LeBron James, any NBA player, and go, and I'll use the Beal specifically in this case, and go, you want a no trade clause? Okay, fine. Negotiate it in a contract with another team who's going to pay you $50 million less. If you want to, if it's so important to you to be in control of your future, you go ahead, you hit free agency, and sacrifice the $50 million. And you want to know what not any of them is going to do? Sacrifice the $50 million. It's not going to happen. And so you already have the leverage to not force them, but push them back to the nest with which they would otherwise fly, a.k.a. back to you. And instead, with $50 million already in their offer more than any other team could offer him, the Wizards were like, oh, you want that too? Here you go. It was asinine then. The way it played out proved that. And the idea that this was in any way a partnership that allowed for quote-unquote long-term planning was either an entire misread of the situation and just a misunderstanding of how business is done in the league by Leonsis and Shepard, or a farce messaging something to try to sell it when they just got their ass handed to them in a negotiation by Mark Bartelstein. Like, I hate that it's that harsh, but I don't know how to do a nice version of this. To me, that is the nice version of this. It was bad. They lost the negotiation. They got absolutely run over. And now we see a year later the results. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. There's another minute of Leonsis talking in this answer. I'm going to skim it in the break and see if there's more meat on the bone there. If not, though, what about some other prominent folks and what they said about Bradley Beal? Not a year ago, but about 2 weeks ago. Went back in our interviews with Michael Winger and Will Dawkins. I asked them both directly about the possibility of trading Bradley Beal. You'll hear what they said, and we can talk about what their thought process might have been from that point until now. Next on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Hope you're having a fantastic Tuesday afternoon. Skimmed a little bit more of the Leonsis thing. A lot more about partnership and commitment and a bunch of stuff that sounds really good in theory. In practice turns into your star player gets to rake you over the coals a year later and force his way to Phoenix while you take back a bunch of second-round picks and salary in return. Thumbs up. Yay. All right, so what do the new guys have to say? I went back in our interviews with Will Dawkins and Michael Winger because I asked them specifically about Bradley Beal. Dawkins wound up being a little bit more of a, let's call it a test case. It wasn't meant to be. I missed on Dawkins because what I tried to do, and I'll peel back the curtain a little bit here, right? If I had asked them, are you going to trade Bradley Beal? They're not going to answer that question. It does not behoove them, and at the time they did not know. Will Dawkins had, now almost famously, flown in the night before. They hadn't had any meetings as a group yet. The only conversations that Winger and Dawkins and Leonsis and Schlenk and Wes Unseld Jr. and John Thompson and anybody else in that front office had were involved in the hiring process and what time to show up. That was probably like an email or a text. Hey, make sure you're at this place by this time tomorrow. Okay, cool. Got it. Thanks. Excellent. See you there. They definitely did not coordinate on what they were wearing because they all wore the exact same blue suit, and I made fun of them for it relentlessly. It was hilarious. Excellent. Beautiful suit. Just really funny when they all wear the exact same one, or what looks to be the exact same one. Anyway, point is, at the time, all I could really ask them, and what I did was try to give them permission to answer the question of, how do you make that decision? How do you get to the point where you trade a Bradley Beal? Or in Dawkins' case in Oklahoma City, a Russell Westbrook? Or in Winger's case in L.A., Blake Griffin, or even Tobias Harris? How do you get to the point with a star player who means a lot to the franchise, and especially with Dawkins in Oklahoma City with Westbrook, someone who is so beloved in Oklahoma City? How do you make the decision to trade them knowing there could be backlash or that, it might hurt your basketball team in the immediate, but that realistically you've capped out and you're not going to be able to win with them, and you're probably not going to be able to acquire the pieces that you need to win with them? Obviously, Durant leaving was the piece they needed. Good luck recruiting someone, a free agent NBA star, to play in Oklahoma City, as great as that organization is. They have to draft guys and keep them there and just hope they do a good enough job and win enough that they don't want to leave. So all that said, I tried to give them a permission structure to answer the question. Will Dawkins didn't exactly take the bait on it, but this is what he said when I asked him about the process of what would go into considering trading Bradley Beal.
That's a very fair question. I will say this, though. There's no decision to be made on Bradley Beal. Like, Brad is under contract. He's a wizard. He's a star player. We're happy to have him. And, it's appealing in the job walking in. You have a player like Brad Beal. So I've talked to a lot of people about Brad. Russell, and
Sure.
I obviously have that relationship. Scott Brooks. Mark Dagnall was actually in Florida with him, our head coach in Oklahoma City. And then Billy Donovan. And they all speak so highly of Brad as a person and the community awards and all he does there. So I can't wait to get to meet him. From afar, I appreciate him and his excellence on the court. So there's no decision to be made on Brad Beal. But in terms of when the timing comes on that stuff, you just got to have good relationships with people. I was the guy picking up Russell from the airport and driving around in my car, and then became his player development guy that he was beating up every morning. So when you're going through that stuff and you have real relationships with people, you can have those kind of conversations when you're impacting their life professionally and personally. So, again, I just want to meet everyone here, not just Brad, build that relationship, and the decisions will take care of itself. But you want the players to know that you're being honest, you're keeping information tight, and we're working together no matter what happens.
And so they worked together. And what working together wound up meeting was going, hey, Mark, as in Mark Bartelstein, the agent for Bradley Beal, where does Bradley want to go? Phoenix? Crap. Okay, we'll call Phoenix. And unfortunately, that was the box that Will Dawkins and Michael Winger walked into. That was not their decision. The no trade clause just put them in that spot that they had to do what they could to get the most out of Phoenix. And luckily, like Phoenix had to play along from a salary standpoint. They had to give up Chris Paul and Landry Shamet because there's the money match rules in the NBA. I mean, you can't just like the Suns can't be like, give us Beal, and the Wizards go, okay, here you go. They have to get something back to make the math work. But the Suns also were at least willing to play along by giving up the remainder of their draft capital that they had left after the Kevin Durant trade, a couple of pick swaps, some second-round picks. If I was the Suns, I would have just been like, he's coming here, man. Like, we're not giving you jack. Take the salary and buzz off. Like, I guess you want to play nice. You want the agent to be happy. Maybe Bartelstein's like, hey, like don't screw them over. Maybe Bradley was like, look, I'm not trying to screw the Wizards over. Like, make it as fair of a trade as you can. Maybe just for relationships between like James Jones and the Suns and Winger and Dawkins here, like they don't want to be bad trade partners. I don't know why they gave in on giving up anything. But it seemed like the Wizards got all they could because there wasn't anything else to get from Phoenix. Unfortunately, they couldn't leverage anything against Phoenix, or they couldn't leverage anything else from anywhere because they couldn't try to get a third team involved, whatever, because Beal said, like, I'm going to Phoenix, that's it. So that's that. So once Dawkins, though, was like, hey, there's no decision to be made on Bradley Beal, and gave me kind of the runaround on it. Well, respect. I get it. It's day one on the job. You don't want to ruffle any feathers. I asked Winger a different way. I asked Winger, and I told him, like, Will said there is no decision to be made on Bradley Beal, but there's a decision to be made on every player. That is the nature of an NBA offseason, to which Winger agreed and gave me what I thought was a pretty insightful answer on what goes into trading a superstar like this. And really, this to me, when he gave this answer, told me in that moment they were going to trade Bradley Beal, whether Winger knew it yet or not.
Great question. I'll just stick to Brad specifically. When you get to a point in time when you, I guess, in many cases, relent to deciding that we cannot win a championship as constituted. The last thing you ever want to do is trade away a player of that caliber, particularly if he's under contract, because you're not at risk of him leaving you.
Right.
It's incredibly hard to get players like that on your team. Every team every year wants a superstar. There's just not many of them, and so the last thing you want to do is move a guy for the sake of just change. I mean, at his level.
Yeah.
But ultimately, why something like that ends up happening is because you've studied everything there is to study. You've pursued every scenario there is to pursue, and you've just come to the realization that, man, no matter what we do, we're just never going to get over this line. We're just never going to get over this particular hurdle, and your last resort is to move a guy of that level. And so anytime you see a guy like that traded, it's because the team and the player generally together have decided that we're just not going to win together. And so you team, for the sake of your future, why don't you move me somewhere else, and me, for the sake of wanting to win, I'd like to go pursue this other opportunities somewhere else. And so it's almost invariably in pursuit of winning. But I mean, it's a last resort.
I love that last sentence from Winger. It's in the pursuit of winning. And I think that's the important thing for anybody that has any reservations. And look, I understand that most Wizards fans were ready to kick Brad out years ago, and that's just the reality. People can get mad at the media for that, but like all we're doing is saying the same thing fans are. We just have microphones. And on some level, it's math. Like you just look at the situation, which is why, by the way, it didn't take Michael Winger and Will Dawkins very long to look at this Wizards roster and look at their plans and look at their options and go, wow. Like listen to the pain and the exhaustion in his voice when he says that. Like You just get to the point where you're like, crap, there's nothing else we can do. We have irreconcilable differences. We must divorce. It didn't take them long to figure out that's what they needed. Why? Because there was no other way. There was no plan. The one outside shot they had wound up being one ping pong ball away. When Victor Wembanyama, they had the first three and a 6 of 11 chance on the final ping pong ball. And it did not come up with their number. That was the only way. And even then, is the Wembanyama timeline and the Beal timeline the same? Probably not. Probably would have traded Brad anyway. Been like, let's rebuild around the kid. What else can we get? So, at the end of the day, like, it's actually pretty simple. They had no choice. And while it would have been in bad taste to say it on that day, what changed between them, saying that stuff then, oh, there's no decision to be made on Beal, and now? They just got together and had the meetings, and they all looked at each other and were like, we're all on the same page, right? Yep, okay, you all are smart. That's why we hired you. Excellent, moving forward. And so they did. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Free reign on calls. What do you think of the Beal trade? 301-230-0980. You excited for the rebuild? You mad about the return? You got this make you believe more in the new front office, less in the new front office. Anything you got? We got a couple minutes here to take some calls before Keith Smith joins us at the top of the hour. 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We'll dive into the numbers of just what all this means for the Wizards, salary cap-wise, and what's next for Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma. Coming up with Keith Smith, Spotrac NBA analyst, coming up at the top of the hour. Right now, though, some calls on Bradley Beal, and perhaps one more thought from Michael Winger from our interview a couple weeks ago. Let's get through the calls first, though. 301-230-0980. Let's start off with Ray in Frederick. Ray, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hi, Craig. Thank you for taking my call.
You got it, man.
Hey, so basically, I think Tommy was fired for Ted's incompetence of too loyal to Beal. And I think that's what happened. Tommy was the fall guy. I say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be loyal to my guys. This is Ted thinking. And if it doesn't work out, I'm going to blame it on him. And he did. And I think that's what happened.
Ray, it's an interesting thought. So I also pulled some sound. I don't think I'm going to play it now, but I will summarize it because, frankly, it's boring. Tommy Shepard was very long-winded and thorough, which I appreciated, but for the purposes of our radio show and the fact that I have 6 minutes left in this segment, playing a 2-minute, 15-second clip of Tommy Shepard from last year after the Beal press conference doesn't seem like a good use of time. So he basically was like, we need to build around Bradley. We need to get young pieces. I like some of the young pieces we have, and we can move forward and build a winner. We should be able to, make the playoffs and the whole deal. And I like the fit. Here's the thing. Tommy Shepard, is the biggest problem with the Wizards the past 4 years that they did not trade Bradley sooner? Absolutely. Whether you go back to 4 years ago or when they traded Wall, 3 years ago, when they traded Westbrook, might be off by a year on these, whether it's last year before you give him the no trade, whatever version of this you want to do, this was the worst possible outcome in terms of Bradley Beal's trajectory with the Wizards. Rising star, playoffs, hurt, finally puts it together, peak seasons, but not on winning teams. And then diminished value, starts to get hurt again, signs just horrendous contract, and then traded for peanuts. That's the worst possible outcome. There's no real winning, and there's lots of money spent and lots of disappointment. But does that mean the plan was bad the entire time? Not necessarily, because let's go back the entirety of Ted's, and this is where I'll defend Leonsis to the extent that this is a defense. The easy punch of the hole in this of this argument is he employed the guys making the decisions and didn't abandon ship fast enough, and that is 100% true. But from a big picture, what I would consider ownership level strategy standpoint, they trade Butler, Arenas, and Jameson. They wind up over the next 4 years having 4 top 5 or 4 top 10 picks. 3 of those turn into pretty good NBA players. 2 of them into stars. John Wall, Bradley Beal. The other pretty good players, Otto Porter. Unfortunately, that was a horrendous draft outside of this Giannis guy that went way later. But they had 3 top 3 picks who turned into solid players. They in theory should have been better. The strategy, you talk about a rebuild and what Philly did, they kind of did it. The problem was the guy they took in the middle was Jan Vesely, who was an abject disaster. A total unmitigated abject disaster. You don't get to do that very often. But that was Jan Vesely in the NBA. And then, they max out Porter. So instead of doing kind of what Oklahoma City did when they had that same kind of stretch of draft picks and trading a guy like Jeff Green and making these marginal improvements and kind of flushing out the roster, they just invested into Otto. They invested into Brad. They invested into John in unreasonable ways. And then, while Ernie occasionally was good at signing a veteran to help, he wasn't very good in the draft. He generally avoided it, which really puts your roster in a bind because you don't have the cheap contracts that you need to fill it out. And then he gets fired. Tommy comes in and just bombs the draft. They had how many straight top 10 picks, and you don't have a single starter? Like, Rui's best served as a bench guy. Denny's best served as a bench guy. I think Johnny Davis, based off what he showed the last 15 games last year, could turn into an NBA starter and a decent one, but he was a total flop as a rookie. There's a lot going on there, and it is what it is. But Tommy's the one who came out and said, like, we think he can help us. And then by the time they get to training camp, it's like, he might compete for minutes, but he's going to spend a lot of the year in the G League. And you're like, you're the guy that told us on draft night that he was good, and you took him 10th. Troy Brown Jr., same thing. Like, they had a draft issue, a scouting issue, they had a player development issue, and if those guys had just been different guys, many of whom were available at those picks, if one of those picks is Tyrese Halliburton, another one of those picks is insert other good player here that was drafted after they picked in those drafts, then maybe we're talking about a team that's made the playoffs 3 or 4 years in a row. Instead, you're talking about the best thing that Tommy did is working out of the financial hole that they were left in by the Wall contract and his subsequent injuries. They won a lot of trades on those grounds, but they ultimately got themselves right back into the same hole with Beal. And then when it came time to build an actual contender as opposed to just create some flexibility, again, they had missed on the draft picks, and then they bombed their biggest trade, which was sending out the Nuggets guys. KCP goes out, helps Denver win a championship. Will Barton absolutely tanks here, which stinks because Will is a great dude, and there was no signs that was coming, but he just flat out didn't work here. And then Monte Morris was like solid, fine, but was not the level of point guard that they needed. And that was always a stretch. Monte was going to have to do more here than he did in Denver. And so the inability to project players ultimately is what gets Tommy Shepard fired and winds us up in this place. That's the thing that, for as much as you want to put the no trade clause on Ted, and you should put the fact that they did not pick someone from outside the organization when they fired Grunfeld on Ted, and you can't put the drafting on Ted. You can't put the trades on Ted. It's the general manager's job to evaluate players, and unfortunately for Tommy Shepard, that is where he went sideways, and thus we wind up today with a whole new executive team, Bradley Beal gone, and not a lot of playoff games, nevertheless playoff wins to show for it over the 11 years of Beal and certainly the last 4 or so since John left. I mean, even longer than that at this point, the 7 since they were really, really good, and then the injuries got to John. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. When we get back, we get nitty-gritty into the NBA salary cap and how it drove this deal and how it sets up the Wizards to make their next moves with Keith Smith, NBA salary cap analyst for Spotrac, here on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube. If you want to watch us, youtube.com/at the Team 980. Every single day, 5 o'clock, we do a segment with an expert on the day's top story. It's called Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in. Not My Beat.
Today's said expert is Keith Smith, NBA analyst for Spotrac. Had Keith on the show, not this version of the show, but many shows before. So smart when it comes to the NBA salary cap. And I think it's really important to talk about the cap ramifications of the Bradley Beal trade and kind of the next steps for everyone involved with someone who can actually give us that level of information. So, Keith, welcome back to the show, man. Good to talk to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I had a caller call in yesterday with a question, and I gave it my best shot at answering, but I'm going to re-ask it to you because you can do a better job than me because I'm a broadcast major who's very bad at math. But the essential question was, why do the Wizards have to do this now? Why could they not wait to do a trade if this was all, quote-unquote, Phoenix could offer them? And you get, what is seen as pennies on the dollar in return. And my attempt at an answer was talking about how the new rules of the CBA are coming in and how the math changes when you cross over into July and all this stuff. So can you try to answer that question in a much better way than my attempt yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty on it. I think, for the Wizards, the challenge is once it was known of, hey, we're pivoting towards a rebuild, and once it was put out there into, the public sphere from all sides of, hey, we're going to work together with Bradley Beal on finding a trade, that becomes very hard to walk back, right? Because there's offers, and you knew that there were going to be other places that, he'd probably be amenable to going to. And the last thing you would need is, hey, the Phoenix Suns wanted him. We didn't like the deal, so we're going to keep him. And guess what? You can just play here. That never goes well, right? That never is, something that ends up turning out well for the team, for the player, for anybody involved. It always goes sideways with that. So from the Phoenix side, they had to get this done now because once we flip the calendar year, it gets a little harder for them to match the salary with the package that they're offering, which is essentially as it stands today. And we'll see if it tweaks by the time it actually gets done. It's a get out of jail free card on Bradley Beal's contract. They're basically getting out of that without owing a whole heck of a lot, to other guys. So that's what was offered. It would just be much harder. And then as you get, if they kept him for, say, a year, and we're a year from now talking about this, any of those really expensive teams, they're really limited on how they can put together trade offers and trade packages, and it just becomes very, very messy. So that's part of what drove this whole deadline of let's get this done. And then because it's the Suns, let's get it done here in the next few days ahead of the draft, or at least ahead of the league year changing over on July 1st.
Keith Smith from Spotrac is with us. And again, there's new rules with the new CBA, which is hilariously not finalized from what I understand too. That teams don't actually have the CBA yet, but are trying to make rules. They kind of have like a terms sheet. Is that still correct? When do we expect that to actually be done?
Yeah, as of yesterday afternoon, the team still did not have that final copy of the CBA, which goes into effect in, let's say, the 20th, so about 11 days. They still do not have that. So it's crazy. Now, the belief is those are kind of, it's the dot the I's, cross the T's kind of things. Like they know what they need to know through the term sheet. They've gotten enough information. Everybody has said, hey, all the team, folks who do the salary cap stuff, all they need to do is pick up the phone and call, the league office. They'll help them through it. Anybody on the player, on the agent side, they just got to call the NBPA. They'll help them through it if they need to know a detail of something with that. But it is, it is a little crazy. It is frustrating for teams. I talked to a couple people who were like, yeah, it's great that we have the term sheet, but there's some details that I really want to know, and I want to know exactly how it's written, because what you don't want to be doing is asking the NBA to make a clarification on something on July 1st when you're trying to, sign a player and agree to a contract and all that sort of stuff.
No doubt. So the other part of the Wizards' timing is kind of this alternate path hypothetical, if you will, which is that, and I had this conversation to an extent yesterday with our midday host here on the station where, he was like, well, Bradley Beal's still really good. Like, why couldn't they try to build around him? And, well, that does on some level come down to your thoughts on Bradley Beal, the basketball player, and whether he's someone that's capable of building a team around that doesn't involve, like, drafting Victor Wembanyama and having someone of that caliber come in. There is also a trade rule that very much limits the Wizards roster building, Keith. Can you explain how difficult it has been and will continue to be for the Wizards to make a trade until that Knicks pick that they owe ultimately is no longer a part of their future?
Yeah, they're somewhat limited in the way they can trade a first-round pick. So if you were going to go the other direction, right, if we rewound things a week or so and it was, hey, we're going to build around Bradley Beal, well, then what you're probably looking to do is, all right, we're going to get Kristaps Porzingis signed to a new deal, keep him around. We're going to try to re-sign Kyle Kuzma, and then, we'll make a couple trades and we'll try to push this thing forward. What makes it challenging in the make the trades part is, you're absolutely right. They owe this protected pick, which still has several years of protections to run. It's now, I believe, owed to the New York Knicks after changing hands a couple of times. So what happens in that situation is you can still make a trade. So basically, if it's, all right, we owe a pick to the Knicks next year, and I don't have it right in front of me, so I apologize. But if it's something like it's top 10 protected next season,
I think it's top 10 next year, top 8 and 25.
Okay. All right,
it's protected through 26, and then it's like 26, 27, it becomes seconds.
Perfect. So in that case, so to top 10 next year. So basically, if you think you're going to be really bad, you're like, all right, well, we're probably going to keep it. That rolls over another year. We can't trade the pick. Or if hey, we're going to be great and we can deliver it and get it out of here. What you can do is you can write up the language of a trade. So let's say, right, they owe that pick to the Knicks. Let's say they made a trade with the Orlando Magic. And they said, hey, Orlando, we're going to make this trade. And then they could write it up and say, we're going to give you a pick that conveys 2 years after we finish this obligation to the Knicks. The problem is, if that was to carry out all the way to the end, now you're past what's tradable for picks. And then that becomes, the Magic are like, well, I guess we're taking second-round picks in 2029. Now that becomes, a little bit messy there. So it's just a complicating factor in that because you can't trade consecutive picks. You have to have at least a year in between. And because they have those protections and don't know when they're going to deliver that pick, that becomes a little bit of a tricky spot there.
Right. And then the other thing, too, is, like, if you say Zion actually becomes available, because this was something that was posited to me mid-year, is like, look, here's the path of how we get good with still having Porzingis, Kuzma, and Beal on the roster. Let's say, and at the time, the person told me, like, keep an eye on, like, LaMelo in Charlotte. Let's say LaMelo by the end of the year is like, get me the hell out of here. I do not want to play in Charlotte. You can't trade multiple first-round picks because you can't trade picks in consecutive years, right, with the Stepien rule. And because you can't trade first-round picks in multiple years, if you don't know when that Knicks pick is going to convey, it literally prevents you from trading multiple first-round picks, correct?
Correct. Yeah, again, you could write up the language as long as you had enough years to run it out, where it could be, 2 years after, pick 1 goes, 2 years after that, pick 2 goes. That was a situation the Chicago Bulls got in with the Orlando Magic and San Antonio Spurs. They gave Orlando 2 picks for Nikola Vucevic at the trade deadline a couple years ago. And they had to then, when they gave up a pick to the Spurs for DeMar DeRozan, they had to write out the language because those picks were all protected, where it was, all right, we're going to do, this pick, and then 2 years after, the second pick will go to Orlando 2 years after that. If it's conveyed, then San Antonio can get it. But if not, then it goes to this. And it was like trying to decipher through and read. Like, there was literally one point I had to write it all down on a legal pad so I could lay it all out year by year what it could be just to understand. And this is what I do all day, every day. So you can do it. It just gets extremely complicated to get into those things. And there's a lot of teams that are like, we just don't even want to deal with it. It's just not a place where we want to be. So, yeah, it was going to be tough for them to trade. Now, the other thing that people would say is, well, then you make another trade with the Knicks. It could be something as minor as we're going to trade you the draft rights to somebody, and as part of that deal, you amend and say, hey, we're just going to give you the pick next year. But the problem is, and you're only willing to do that if you feel like, yeah, we'll be a playoff team. We're going to be really good. Because if you don't feel like that gets really risky, and that's the kind of stuff. I mean, I get it. The front office is all changed over anyway, but that's the kind of thing that gets you fired.
Right, totally. The Wizards certainly not in position to give up anything unprotected next year. because they might intentionally somewhat be terrible. And of course, that's and I think it's top 12 actually next year, top 10 the year after that, top 8 the year after that. So we'll see when that ultimately conveys. But again, like, the idea that they could win a bidding war for a Zion, a Ja, a LaMelo, a whoever, insert young player who's good here, is just impossible because you can't offer a package of multiple first-round picks. Which brings us to my next question. Keith Smith, NBA analyst for Spot Track, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. How do the Wizards ultimately then do this? Because if you don't do what the Thunder did, where they get every pick the Clippers own from now until forever, it's like, okay, well, we see the path. You're going to use the first-round picks to draft players, or you're going to package them and acquire players in a trade. The Wizards got on paper, they got nothing back. But, Keith, what did they unlock here? Like, what is the path forward for Will Dawkins to build this team as the new general manager?
Yeah, provided they do not turn right around and give Kyle Kuzma a 4-year, 5-year big contract, or do something crazy with Porzingis, you unlocked a ton of flexibility moving forward. You eliminated after this season, after this trade rather, $208 million that was owed to Bradley Beal. That's now off your books. That's you basically have wiped your hands as clean of that as possible after this season. And we'll see, maybe even before, because we don't know how it's going to turn out with Chris Paul and with Landry Shamet. If they reroute those guys, if this turns into a third trade or whatever, we could feel very differently about it. So I get it. There's a lot of people who are screaming and yelling of, Bradley Beal is a 25-point per game scorer, and, he's really good. And, we know he's paid a lot of money, but they got literally nothing back except what looks like a bundle of second-round picks and, some pick swaps. Well, why? What were they doing? Well, what they were doing was getting out of $208 million owed to Bradley Beal through the next several years. And because you found a place he was willing to go to, that made it key to get it done because of that no-trade clause. If you'd let this drag out, all he had the ability to do was continue to say, nah, I don't like it. Even if he wanted to go to the team, if it was like, yeah, I'll go to Team X, but you can't take back player, A, B, and C in the deal because I want to play with those guys. That just makes all those things very, very difficult. So, in this case, it was one of those things where they made the decision of, hey, we want the flexibility, we want to clear the books. And I think there's reporting out there of, maybe, Porzingis and Kuzma work new deals with the team and all that. I tend to find that to be fairly unlikely because I think they're going to really do what they can to say, hey, we're going to bottom this thing out and we're probably going to be pretty bad for a year or two. But they did, and that's all new territory for the Wizards, right? They've never really done that. They've always been kind of, we're content to be somewhere between, 6 and 10 and chasing a playoff spot and all that. And it was made very clear in every press availability after the new front office got there that, hey, we have permission to, blow this thing up and fully rebuild if we need to. So it's a new place to be in, but, it's not the worst place in the world. You brought up the Thunder. Thunder fans would tell you they had known since that team had moved nothing but success in Oklahoma City, and then they blew it up and they started a full scale rebuild. And granted, yes, they had multiple picks to work with and all that stuff, but so far those have been their own picks that they've done their most work with. But now it's starting to turn in the right direction, and they feel pretty good about the process. So you just got to let the front office see their vision through.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, you said with that flexibility, it allows you to take on bad contracts. It allows you to do all these things to acquire assets and then ultimately use them. But I do think the Kuzma part of this is interesting. Like, Porzingis opts in, he gets $36 million this year. You flip him either immediately or at the deadline, hopefully, and that allows you to get some kind of asset. Sweet. That one's straightforward. Kuzma, there's kind of this adage in the NBA, Keith, you don't ever want to lose an asset for nothing, which would mean the Wizards would want to re-sign Kuzma so they don't just lose him. But considering their cap situation, are they better off re-signing him and trying to find a trade home and letting him, they got to pay someone, and two, someone's got to take shots. So if he goes and averages 25 a game for the first 3 months of the season, is that actually the worst thing for them? Like, what do you do with Kuzma? Because they're also in the rare spot that teams get him where if they let him walk, like, that actually is cap space potentially for them because they are going to be so far under thanks to getting rid of Beal's money.
Yeah, a lot of this comes down to what happens with Chris Paul. They just take Chris Paul in at the roughly $25 million he's guaranteed and they waive him and move on from that, or if they, then flip him for another, deal, or they somehow work a deal where, hey, he's going and we're not even taking money back because it's going into cap space or whatever the situation is, then I think you're in a spot where, you know what, let's really, in one summer, let's take this thing down as far as we can. Because right now, the only long-term money that is significant on their books that is owed, and it doesn't even start till next year, is Daniel Gafford. He's the only guy who's owed, a decent chunk of change. So that's where you're sitting in a spot, if you're the Wizards, where it is, hey, we can really, start with basically books that are about as clear as you can get them in the NBA. You're never going to get all the way to zero, but we could start this, pretty low here, and we're in a spot where all of a sudden, people are all jazzed up because the Houston Rockets have $60 million in cap space to spend. Well, the Wizards could look at that a year from now and be like, guess what? We have $90 million to spend. We're in a spot where we can go forward. Yeah, Kuzma at $25 million. I think it's perfectly fair value, but it starts to become, what do you need that for, right? Good players who can score and do things like that on a bad team start to turn into, it's kind of like having a really great closer on a bad baseball team. It's like, what's the point, right? For the, once every 2 weeks, he's going to win us a game. In the NBA, tends to be a little more different where it's like, we don't even really want to win that game, right? We want to kind of bottom this thing out draft-wise. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. My guess is Kuzma's going to look at it. Maybe there's a sign-and-trade possibility or something, but I think he's going to look at all these teams with cap space. He's a great fit for basically every single one of them. And I think he's going to look at it and say, those teams are prioritizing winning sooner than what we might be doing here in Washington. I want to go. But, yeah, he may like the idea of, hey, yeah, I can come in, I can put together a bunch of points, and maybe we do turn this thing around very quickly.
So for Kuzma, they can offer him an extra year and more money than everyone else still, right? They still, even though he opts out, he has they have bird rights on him?
Yeah, they have his full bird rights, so they can offer him up to 5 years. Nobody else can offer him that. They can offer him up to his max, which they can go higher in the raises. The first year salary would be the same for him anywhere, but they can offer him up to 8% raises on his deal in that fifth year. That's where the big kind of swing comes in, and where they could offer a lot more money. But my guess is, just coming off this Bradley Beal contract that turned sour on him, I don't think they're going to be offering a 5-year contract this summer. I think they'll look at it more of, hey, if we can do something reasonable for 3 or 4 years, all right, maybe that's a game where we're willing to get into with you. But otherwise, hey, good luck where you go next, and we'll figure out. The other thing we got to remember too is this current front office. None of these guys were their guys. They didn't draft any of them. They didn't sign them. They didn't trade any of them. They feel that there's no attachment. There's no man, if I let this guy go, I have to admit we made a mistake on going to get him. They don't have any of that. So they have pretty much carte blanche to, wipe this thing as clean as they can.
Yeah, I just wonder if a team like Detroit is like, hey, the icing on the cake to get him here is we're willing to do the sign and trade with Washington so he gets more money. So that could be a recruiting
So
pitch.
that is different, though.
Yeah.
That you can't get more money
on the sign and trade?
Yeah, they've changed that.
That's right. They did change that.
It's been a while now. Yeah, so that came off the table. You can only get as much in an outright signing as you can get through a sign and trade now.
Got it. So it would have to be a very illegal sign, wink, 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 we'll get you at the trade deadline type of thing, which the NBA would not be too pleased about.
Yeah, that would not be how I'd want to start my new front office tenure with, hey, guess that draft pick you liked having? Guess what? You don't have it anymore.
Right.
You pulled off something really shady.
Right. Okay, real quick, last couple of minutes here with Keith Smith, NBA analyst for Spotrac. I want to run through a couple of the other players on the roster and what you think their value would be. Like, what could the Wizards get in return? We can do, literally 15, 30 seconds on all these guys to wrap up here. So, Monte Morris, veteran point guard, excellent backup. Probably not ideal as a starter, but depending on the situation, if you have, another, if he had been involved, say, in the Phoenix trade where Devin Booker's going to be your ball handler, then sweet. But what do you think the Wizards could get for Monte Morris?
Yeah, I'd be making a call to a team like Memphis that has a need for a point guard with John Morant out for a third of the season. Maybe Tyus Jones could be on the move. We'll see. And I'd say, hey, what do you think about, but we'll send him to you. and then you give us, one or two of your kids that are at the end of your bench that, they're okay, but you're not super sure on. So maybe, a guy like, Jake LaRavia or, Kenneth Lofton Jr. or something like that. You're not going to get a huge return from Monty Morris, but you might be able to get in a spot where it is, all right, I kind of like, we're taking chances here, right? We're shooting for upside on these guys, and if they pop, we feel really good about it.
So a guy that I think is actually more interesting, and if I'm a contender after watching these playoffs, I want desperately, is DeLon Wright. Really, really, really good defender. Somewhat reliable three-point shooter. Not excellent, but you kind of know what he is. What do you think the Wizards could get for DeLon Wright, who has, I believe, just 1 year remaining? So it's 1 year, 1 year, $8.1 million on his deal.
Yeah, it's probably a similar type situation where it turns into, all right, who needs a point guard and a guy who's obviously very comfortable coming off the bench because he's done it for most of his career. If you're trying to get involved in one of those teams again, send us, one of your, younger players back that can maybe pop for us. Maybe a guy who needs to change the scenery. Think about what James Wiseman got traded for, right? We're going to shuffle the depth chairs a little bit around here. You're probably looking at something like that. Who was a former draft pick that's maybe a year, 2, 3 years into his career, and we can get him, we can bring him in here and give him a bunch of minutes and see if he can really become something. Because the challenge is with those guys, most of the teams that are really good as contenders, they're pretty well set at point guard. So you're probably looking at, hey, I'm going to bring you in as a high-level backup player, and a high-level backup point guard, there's a limit to how much you're going to give up to get him.
Yeah, and actually Golden State would be a super interesting team there, depending on
Sure.
what they think of Moody and his ability to kind of handle the ball and everything moving forward. And I think DiVincenzo might be a free agent who's about to get paid a bunch of money, so they need a replacement for him. That could be a good one. All right, then the last guy's the big one. What do you think is a realistic type of deal for Porzingis? Because I've seen some crazy stuff where it's like, could he in the 8th pick go to Portland for 3? And I'm like, in what dream world is that happening? But realistically, what do you think they could get a first-round pick or I'll call it a high-quality young player in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis?
Yeah, I think they can. I think it's going to be funny in retrospect if they trade him, if he opts in and then they turn around and trade him. It's probably going to be a much better return than what they got for Bradley Beal because it's a 1-year contract, right? So anybody's going to be willing to say, yeah, we'll take a shot on Porzingis and figuring it out. And I know a lot of people probably weren't watching the Wizards towards the end of the season, but he had a great year. Stayed mostly healthy, and I think in my opinion, had the best year of his career that he's had. I think he was very, very good, nearly an all-star level guy. So I think for Porzingis, yeah, you could definitely get into a spot where all of a sudden you feel like, you know what? All right, let's go. I can see the Portland idea. I mean, that's great. If they pull that off, what a win by that front office. But it's not going to be that good. But if it could be like, hey, yeah, we got a future first from a team that's maybe a little shaky. That'd be a good win. And future first and the kid, and you're probably eating a contract and maybe get an extra pick for eating the contract just to match the salary. Yeah, you'd have done well in a deal like that.
No doubt about it. Keith Smith, NBA analyst for Spotrac. I've got a podcast there. Keith's got great articles, financial previews for the summer for all 30 NBA teams on the website. Keith, this was fantastic, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as these moves actually come to fruition over the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Keith Smith, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show on the Team 980. We're streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. And when we get back, a little football. Logan and I had a really interesting conversation about the rookie offensive lineman draft picks on Take Command. We will play it for you before we're joined by Sebastian Salazar at 6 o'clock here on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And each and every week, I host a little podcast called Take Command. Again, it's not that little anymore. But do it with Logan Paulson. It's very fun. We have very interesting discussions. We've now entered what we're calling Logan Silly season, where we're doing all kinds of fun stuff on the podcast. It's a little bit off the beaten path. I will say, though, two things. One, the part of the podcast you're about to hear for today's Take Command Tuesday is a pretty, I would say, within the lines football discussion, because it was kind of the main or the biggest remaining topic that we hadn't talked about on the show from the offseason, which is what happens with the rookie offensive linemen that are apparently just going to be backups, even though you spent third and fourth round picks on them. So you'll hear that in just a moment. I will also tell you, though, you should subscribe to Take Command if somehow you haven't already, because we got James Smith-Williams on the show tomorrow. So we got an interview with an active Commanders player. James has a camp coming up in July. If you're a parent of a 7th through 12th grader, it is free and signups are available now. I have retweeted the information on my page within the last couple of days. You can also go to James's Twitter page or his Instagram, and they've got all the information of how to sign up there. So that's very exciting. And we're going to talk to James about why he wants to do this, some of his amazing nonprofit work, as well as obviously a lot of football stuff with him, what it's like to exist in that room with John and Duran and Montez and all those guys. So it's going to be a really fun chat with James. Looking forward to that. James Smith-Williams tomorrow on Take Command. We'll probably bring some of that to you here on the radio as well. However, for right now, that conversation mentioned about the offensive lineman, here it is, Take Command Tuesday on the Hoffman Show. Kind of a hot topic that we haven't touched on yet. I wanted to get through the mini camps and through OTAs and through everything first before talking about this and kind of see how it played out. But we had a mailbag question about this as well. And I've kind of thought about it, and I think it's time to have the discussion. The Commanders used their third-round pick on Ricky Stromberg, center out of Arkansas. They used their fourth-round pick on Braden Daniels, who they are calling a tackle. Those guys are pretty deep on the depth chart to where, like, if they weren't draft picks, you'd be like, oh, wow, they're on the fringe of making the team kind of place on the depth chart. And that seems, in my opinion, very silly for a third, especially third and fourth round pick. I will say that Stromberg was a late third compensatory pick, pick number 97 overall, but he's still a third round pick. And I just think there's kind of two avenues to go down here. One, the evaluations of the players themselves, what you thought of them coming out, what you've seen of them so far this spring. And then kind of this larger philosophical question about roster building of taking what they're telling us, which is that these guys are backups and possibly even deep backups, and using a third and fourth round pick on it on a football team that needs starters and there are players available that could have helped more immediately. So I don't know which direction you want to go first. We will cover both of them, but I think this is something that should be discussed because it's, the margins are thin in this league, and these are the kinds of, roster decisions, roster building decisions that help you miss or make the playoffs. And of course, they're trying in an incredibly important season with new ownership coming in with this front office to prove that they're a make the playoffs kind of team.
Yeah, this is something that I've been kicking around for a while, and so I guess we'll talk about the players first, right?
Sure.
And so in the third round where they were picking, I think he was like the 97th pick, like Ricky Stromberg. I like him as a player, I do. I don't value the center position the same way that they do. Obviously, that's a priority for them. You go out and you sign Nick Gates, you bring Larson back, you draft Stromberg, like that. That is something that if I was building a team, Logan Paulson GM, I would not do.
Why is that? Why is the center position? Because obviously it's not like it's not important. You can't throw one of us out there at center. But like, why is that a position that is not as valuable for you?
Because in this landscape of we want to diversify our positions, we want guys that can play multiple spots. Traditionally, centers can't play multiple spots. Guys that just play centers, and most guys that I played with, most guards, have some center background in their history, right? And so you get a whole bunch of really good guards, and then one of them backs up at center, like your swing guy, like Wes Schweitzer. I think Wes Schweitzer was a perfect example. He's a serviceable guard. He's probably a better center, but he can play all three spots. And so they've been kind of touting position flex, and I understand the value of that in today's NFL. That's extremely important. You're only carrying 7 or 8 guys on game day. You need to make sure you have guys that can play multiple spots. But, they've kind of said Nick Gates is going to play center. Ricky's going to play center. And that to me is a little bit confounding because like the easier position to play, at least in my perspective, is center. And why is that? Centers aren't covered up usually. So a guard usually have a 3 technique, someone over their outside shoulder, a 2-eye, someone over their head, or a shade. And they have to negotiate that kind of at all times. If you look at Kelsey, the center in Philadelphia,
Jason Kelsey,
Jason, like a lot of his highlights, he's working in a combination with another player, right? Because that's the structure of an NFL defense. Very rarely are you just like drive blocking a nose. And so to me, like I want a guy that can block a 3 technique and then play center. I don't want a guy that can just play center. So as much as I like Ricky as a person and as a player in terms of, I was really high on him as an evaluation. I'm kind of like that. Where does he fit in terms of this roster construction idea, right? How does he help you long term? Because he's only going to play center. I don't I've seen him around the building. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be a top flight guard. He just doesn't have like the length or the size that some of those really good guards have. So I think he's going to be an excellent center, but that unfortunately means that he's not going to be able to play another spot for you for a couple years at a minimum, right? Because that's where he's getting all his reps. That's where he's most comfortable. That's what he did in college. And so I think that's the thing about that pick that is somewhat confounding to me on a certain level is he a good player? Absolutely. Does he fit the vision that they've been talking about? I'm not entirely, I don't know. And I think maybe long-term they view the O-line in a different lens than I do. And what I mean by that is I think that, that's a luxury piece that fills out depth for you. And if you think the O-line's ready for that, that's great. And that's a question for Ron about where he feels. And I think he's been pretty emphatic about he feels that group is ready and they just needed some kind of touch-up type of depth pieces. And that's entirely that's one of the things we're going to have to find out as we go into training camp.
It very much feels like they think Eric Bieniemy can just make this offensive line work. They are not super talented. They are not.
Well, to be fair, they are talented, but they haven't lived up to the talent at all spots, right? Like Cosme, a very talented guy.
Sadiq Charles, okay, Cosme's the one. He's a second.
And I would say Sadiq Charles also. When you look at him on paper and look at his height, weight,
sure,
speed,
but what round draft pick was he?
I think it was a third or fourth, something like that. Yeah.
So like, there's no first rounders on this.
Correct.
Line.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no studs. There's no Trent Williams. There's no some of the guys that they've had.
Brandon Sheriff, right?
Yeah, some of the guys they've had here. Some of the guys they've had in Kansas City. There's not the guys that they have in Philly. Like the talent level is not high.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all NFL players, but that's kind of the thing. They're all just maybe somewhere between good. Cosme could be pretty good. Cosme was a second rounder. somewhere between pretty good to like solid NFL players. And it seems like they think the scheme, the play calling, the coaching of Eric Bieniemy and his staff can elevate them to a level. And by the way, a different approach to quarterback play, let's call it, getting the ball out quickly, having someone who's a little bit more mobile back there. Obviously Taylor was mobile, but Sam, they're going to actually run, and that threat changes how defenses rush. So I just feel like there is not where a lot of people I think went into the offseason, whether this is media type evaluators, us included, fans, whatever, NFL observers, saying they need to add talent to the offensive line.
Yeah.
They certainly got a little bit better position by position. There is a major question at left guard. I would say center is still kind of a pretty big question. I mean, Nick Gates hasn't played a lot of center in his career. He hasn't played a lot in his career period because of injuries. And, Cosme hasn't been able to stay healthy. Like there's still a lot of legitimate questions about that offensive line in terms of the talent, but they seem to be okay with that. And so I'm forgetting what you said that prompted that thought for me, but it does seem, because you were like Logan Paulson GM would do it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
That seems to be a part of the calculation, is that they just need like NFL average caliber football players, and the scheme and everything else around it will do the rest.
Well, I'm pretty confident that the scheme will elevate that group. I think when you look at how Wiley was used in Cincinnati, he's a good player there, and it's not, and he's not in this.
Kansas City,
what'd I say? Doesn't
Cincinnati.
Matter. Yeah, Wiley. And so, it's not going to be kind of put in this, Air Coryell, 7-step drop offense where he's got to win these really tough matchups down and down out. And so I believe the scheme will elevate those guys. I think Cosme will play better again, because they're going to be leveraged less. Like when you go back and watch some of the past stuff they did last year, it was a very high leverage situation oftentimes. And I think Wiley will be good. I think Cosme's got to develop. I feel pretty confident about Gates after watching him in the spring. Left guard, like you said, still a question mark. And then obviously left tackle. And I think he'll play better too. Leno will play better because of the scheme. I think we're kind of missing the main point where when you say looking at draft capital and draft allocation, was Ricky Stromberg and was Braden Daniels the right selection? Given your philosophy. And so that's the thing that I keep kind of hemming and hawing about, is because like I love my evaluation of Stromberg, but like you said, he's a 3rd round pick. Like, where does he fit? And again, if you're drafting off your board and he's the best guy on your board, I'm totally fine with that. Like, you got to trust your evaluation. Is my evaluation exactly the same as yours? No. But then I go and I say, Braden Daniels, like they see him as a tackle. That's what they've said. And when I look at my own evaluation, like, I don't know if I'm as confident as they are that he can play tackle. Like, I think he's going to be, to me, he reminds me a lot of Sadiq. He's got high athletic upside, technically very raw, and probably plays guard in the NFL, right? So you've done a good job of getting guys that theoretically could have play multiple positions, but unfortunately you end up with guys that can only play guard. Like Chris Paul, I think, is a great example. Sadiq's a great example. Like, if he had to play tackle in a game, if either one of those guys had to play tackle in a game, you'd be a little nervous about it, right? Like they said that last year when he played against Dallas. They were like, he's our 3rd tackle. Like, we don't feel great about it. There's a reason he's your 3rd tackle. It's because his body type and his skill set lends itself more to guard. So I think that's the thing that is a little bit little confusing about the whole process, is like you've prioritized position flex by getting tackles that can play guard. But at some point you need to say, we need to solidify this group with guys that can play tackle at a high level too, right? And I think they've done a good job with that. I think Wiley fits that mold to a certain extent. I think Leno fits that mold to a certain extent. I think Korn fits that mold. But in terms of areas that needed depth and development, I would have thought they would have kind of prioritized maybe tackle with one of those picks, with the 3rd round pick or the 4th round pick. And that's not an indictment of either one of those players. It's just in terms of fit and helping the roster. Like, they have a lot of guards on the team, and so that's the thing that I'm kind of like, well, does he move the needle for you at guard? And then, Ron, I have a lot of respect for Ron, but he comes out and says Braden Daniels not in the guard competition. And it's like, So he's going to basically be inactive for the whole season because he's not playing tackle for you this year. So that's the thing that I kind of get a little bit. And again, I'm not in the room. I'm not in the evaluation. These are just thoughts that I have regarding those decisions specifically. And I have a ton of respect for Ron, a ton of respect for the organization. And they have a vision, which I respect, but sometimes it doesn't always line up in my mind, I guess.
Sure. So here's the way I'll put it, because you've now touched on the part that drives me nuts and is, I would say, more my lane, bigger picture type of stuff than, you who sits down and watches the tape and like really has an opinion on Braden Daniels. I could watch tape for hours of that guy and think, I don't know, what did Logan think?
Yeah.
I'm not an offensive line evaluator, and I don't pretend to be. What I am is someone who can look at a big picture and be like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And there's just an inefficiency in it. Why are you drafting in the 3rd and 4th round when you could be getting starters, or at least guys who are going to be parts of rotations and impact you this season? Why are you drafting backups and inactive players in the 4th and especially the 3rd round? If things go well this year, Ricky Stromberg doesn't play. And you're not even giving him a chance. And like, that's the thing. If ultimately you draft him and Nick Gates is able to stay healthy and he is just better, okay, like that's a great problem to have. Hey, this guy's good. Sweet. He beat out our Ricky. Keep getting better. And in the future, you're going to play for us. But for right now, like Nick's better than you. He's got experience. He's more prepared. And he's going to start for us at center, and you're going to be the backup, or you're going to be inactive. And maybe eventually you get onto the active roster. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But when you come into training camp or come into OTAs and he's starting to work with the 4s and the 3s behind guys who have been in the league and been around, and you know what they are, and what they are is like fine at best, with all due respect to like Tyler Larson and was it Noah Laufenberg, who, by the way, Noah Laufenberg is a large human.
Big man.
That is a big man. I kept going, who is 74? That is a giant.
He's a tall fellow, yeah.
Yeah, tall, wide, great, big offensive lineman. But like, he's played a little bit and it hadn't gone great.
Yeah.
So if you're not giving reps to a rookie who you took in the 3rd round over Noah, all due respect to Noah Laufenberg, as explained, large man, Noah, I mean no harm, please. I mean no harm. And Tyler Larson,
it's just draft equity. You've invested in that position,
right?
With a not inconsequential piece. And so I've been a part of teams. They draft a tight end. I know the score, man. Like, and so it's a little surprising that they haven't abided by that. And I think Ricky is a guy that could push for starting minutes. Probably not this year, but at some point in the future. He's a good football player, right? The thing is, like, that is, I think, probably more to your point is, were there guys that were more impactful? Now, it's impossible to know because draft evaluation's tough and everyone has a little different opinion. And I know that they were looking at offensive linemen earlier and that fell through or whatever, right? And that happens. But and they felt like they needed to address the need. But I think the other thing is, like, like you said, like, are they going to play football for you this year? And
are you going to give them a chance?
Ricky,
like,
probably
are you going
not.
to legitimately give them a chance to earn snaps on the field, which isn't going to happen practicing with the 4s?
Yeah, and I think like Ricky, of the two, Ricky has the most talent potential to play this year. But Braden, like I said, there's a lot of athletic upside, a lot of things to be excited about with him. But like, based on what we've seen in OTAs and based on his college film, he's not going to play for you this year. Like, he's not, and so he's going to be one of your 53 guys that are active on game day because you don't want to lose him. And he's going to be not playing football for you. And so I think that's the thing that is, again, like, to your point, it's tough to negotiate that for a team. Now, I think when you take a big step back and say, like, maybe the roster is healthy enough to tolerate kind of a youth development program. And what I mean by that is, you look at the defense, and I don't know where you would draft anybody, maybe linebacker. I don't know. But obviously
that's the one position that I was thinking of. And that's the point I would make next is, like, they don't need any more corners. Like, they're already pretty deep there. And
receiver, no,
especially like
end,
3rd round. Yeah.
Running back, no. Like, it's and so, like, where would you go? And linebacker is a position in this last draft, especially, that was tough. It was a tough position to evaluate. It was a tough to find a position where guys So like I think I told you this when I'm doing my draft stuff, where I just go yes or no for first pass, right? Can he play in the NFL? Yes or no? And it was hard to find guys that I would give a yes to, just to give you some context. So I know a lot of those guys went earlier in the round, the guys that were kind of tweener high upside players. And so maybe they were like, there's nobody here that we think can do it. So why am I going to waste a pick in that area just for the position, on a position that's been devalued by the NFL? But I do look and I say, well, that's the other crazy thing is they did a great job with UDFAs getting 4 receivers that look good enough that they could make the squad. So it's tough. And the thing that sticks out to me, and I think I mentioned this to you, Craig, is like there were other players around that position that I had a higher draft grade on, and I don't have access to the medical. And so that's why the guys that I felt like were emphatically yes in terms of how they could contribute and compete for a roster spot. And they went in a different direction. Again, like Ricky was like my fourth graded center, and all the other centers that I had ahead of him were gone. So like I like that's good value there. But for this team in this roster, is there a different way you could have gone?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say too is like they took Rodriguez and KJ Henry later because they have gotten better players at those positions, and we'd have to go back and look at the board, and even us doing that, the reason we're not going to do it is because we don't know. Like we don't know what their evaluations were, and for all we know, they got steals that KJ Henry in the 5th is going to wind up being a better NFL football player than who they would have taken in the 3rd. So I mean, we're now in this post draft like we'll see kind of thing, and that's kind of why I'm like, he's practicing with the 4s. Okay. Ooh, he's moved up to the 3s. I think Stromberg by the end of OTAs did get a couple reps with the 2s, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So maybe it's just, kind of the rookie formality, and we're making a little bit too much out of it, and we'll see what happens when he gets to training camp. But if you had asked me the day after the draft, and we probably talked about it this way on the podcast immediately after the draft, is Ricky Stromberg their starting center? I would have said, yeah, probably. Like, that's why you drafted him in the 3rd round. Excellent. Good draft pick. Good job. Yeah. But if he's not, and he's not even going to legitimately get a chance to compete for it, that changes how I view the use of that asset, right? Yeah. Now I'm getting ready for the radio show where I'm going to talk a lot about Bradley Beal and asset management, right? But like, this is the game in the salary cap era of this sport and other sports, is that you have to manage your assets well. And whether that is trading a player who you're not going to re-sign and recouping some value, if that value is greater than the compensatory pick, a la the conversations we could be having about Chase Young or Montez Sweat if this season goes sideways, whether it's using draft picks on the right type of guys who are going to contribute in the right ways for your roster. You just can't be inefficient. And I just feel like that's my kind of gripe with it, is those picks felt inefficient. If they have the roster depth to deal with that, and that is also like a way to build, right? You build it up enough that you can take some of those risks and maybe, say, hey, Daniels is not going to play for us right now, but we feel like in 2 years he could be a really good player. Okay. If that's your timeline and you feel good about every other position, but you just better have everyking else shored up. And that's the thing where I think we're a little unconvinced.
And my question to you would be like, what are the odds that he's gonna reach that he's gonna be like, have that ability to be your starter or whatever it is, like that's the thing. It's like I don't know. I don't want to get too sidetracked there, but it's that what if question that you posed there, I think is really compelling, because it's like, like that'd be great if he turns into this guy, but you're counting on a ton of development from a guy who's very raw. And again, there are flashes with Daniel's film, and I think he has the physical capability of being a starting caliber player. I just think it's going to be a guard. And I think Stromberg is a guy that I like a lot. He is close to contributing to an NFL roster, but he's going to sit for a year. And again, like, would you have been better served like drafting a guy that was more ready or whatever? And it's an unknowable question right now, and we'll know in a couple of years. But I think that's why that feels a little funky to a lot of fans and a lot of guys in the media too.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add too is, especially at the offensive line position, yes, you're in on field goal protect, but there's not a lot of special teams value in the meantime. Yeah. And so you wind up being inactive and like literally being, respectfully a 0 because you're not playing the entire year, plus whatever you add on the practice field, which can be valuable. But it's not like if you miss on a safety, he's Jeremy
playing
Reeves.
teams. He's
And-
playing teams.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden we accidentally, we missed on our safety, or maybe they knew he was going to be a teams guy, but like he's not good enough to play safety down in, down out for many years of his career, but he's an all-pro special teamer, so he's contributing in a very meaningful way. You don't get that on offensive line. And so that's another, kind of facet to this argument that I think should be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to finish up. Like, I think I've met both those guys, Braden Daniels and Ricky Stromberg. Yeah. They're awesome kids. I think they're good football players. We're just talking about, was that the right decision for them? Not are those guys bad football players? I'm not saying that. Got a lot of respect for them and what they're doing is tough. But does this roster have the depth to basically redshirt 2 players and a 3rd or 4th round pick for the year? And yeah, I don't know if they do or not, and we'll find out soon enough. Yeah,
and I'll say this. We'll finish up on a positive note, if you will. To the team's credit, someone's got to be inactive.
Yeah.
So
right.
Typically it is going to be later offensive linemen. If those are talented, futures projects, if you will, then okay, someone's got to be. But I think the reality is we know that the idea that like, oh, these guys are going to be inactive the whole year, we don't need those roster spots, is wishful thinking with injuries in the NFL, where guys are going to have to step up because, guys in front of them go down. And how do you have the depth to fill those spots? And that's really the ultimate question that we're asking, to which we'll find out the answer as the year goes.
Want more from Craig and Logan? Subscribe now on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. More Hoffman Show next on the Team 980 and the free Odyssey app.
the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980, and it is our pleasure to welcome back to the show. I think this is the first time he's actually joined us from America. Last time he was joining us from Qatar, but it is our good friend Sebastian Salazar, ESPN FC. There is so much soccer news, men's and women's side. Sebi, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, and great to be joining you from the States this time.
Yes, we don't have to figure out a time difference to Qatar.
Oof, that was brutal, man. We were starting our work days at midnight and then going until about 8 a.m. local time. And then we'd have to go to training in the morning and watch all the games. So talk about working 24/7. But, man, what a blast that was. I think that was one of my favorite work assignments of all time.
Yeah, it's a World Cup. It's pretty good. Are you going to Australia and New Zealand for the women?
I'm not. We're definitely sending some people, on behalf of ESPN. We were talking before the break. I just had a kid, so the timing didn't necessarily work out in that regard. But we'll have full coverage on ESPN FC, Football America, as my colleague Alexis Nunes is going to be kind of the one spearheading the coverage from on the ground over there.
Gotcha. So let's start with the men. We do now know, unlike at the start of the show, we do officially know the roster will be announced for the women tomorrow. So we'll get to some of the decisions that Vlatko Andonovski has to make for the Women's World Cup team with just 30 days until that tournament starts in a little bit. But the men this weekend, they win the Nations League title, and amidst that, there's bigger news in that Greg Berhalter is coming back. I'll just ask you without giving my opinion, without doing anything, just what did you make of the decision to return to Berhalter after this extensive search?
Well, I think you have to question whether it was an extensive search or not. And I think that's really kind of where the frustration comes in for U.S. fans. U.S. Soccer had this press conference. It was very odd on Friday morning, where it was effectively the brass of U.S. Soccer trying to explain why they had brought Berhalter back, while Greg Berhalter sitting there also getting questions about, getting the job, which should be a highlight in his career. Very awkward. And I think you go back to kind of how everything melted down after the World Cup. There was the dispute between Greg Berhalter and Gio Reyna, and then Gio Reyna's parents famously getting involved. There was not the allegation, the admission of domestic violence from Greg Berhalter that kind of came out of that. He admitted to it on Twitter in kind of a hastily created, unverified Twitter account. That set off an investigation at U.S. Soccer, at which point everybody thought, okay, Greg Berhalter didn't necessarily convince everybody as a manager, but with the domestic violence on top of that, there's just no way that this guy's coming back.
Yeah. And not just the accusation, which was 30 years old, but the chaos it created.
Yeah, and I think what really it underlined, not to downplay domestic violence, that's obviously kind of a headline, but really, what people talked about coming out of that was not the act of domestic violence. It was the idea that Greg Berhalter had been blackmailed, which, by the way, never actually happened. It's actually a lesson in very effective PR from Greg Berhalter and his crew to announce and admit that you committed an act of domestic violence, and everybody came away with it almost feeling like Greg Berhalter was the victim. So I think Greg Berhalter at that point, people thought, look, this is just clean for everybody to break away. You bring in a new sporting director. U.S. Soccer announced that they had hired a consulting firm to kind of help them with this new coach. All this money goes into it. You're sure that there's going to be a different outcome. And yet, at the end of what we're forcefully told is a very extensive search. And when you have to say it so many times, it makes you doubt it. You end up with the same guy. So I think there's a lot of frustration just in terms of the process and then the ambition. We're coming up on the 2026 World Cup. This is the best generation of American players by far, and American fans wanted to see the federation swing for the fences with a big name, and that didn't happen here. Bringing back Greg Berhalter very much feels like business as usual.
Yeah, and yet there's a lot of support from players. And Sebi, this is where I am honestly torn, because I came out of it going, the thing that starts the downhill spiral of all the actions you just described is a coaching decision by Greg Berhalter to not play Gio Reyna, which Gio Reyna is one of the best players in the program. That to me was not a way to set your team up for success, keeping a talented player off the field, especially one who could generate goals when your problem was scoring goals. And oh, by the way, there was like 2 or 3 other roster decisions that were questionable at best. We talked about them at the time of players that he left behind for that World Cup. So there were football reasons to not go back to Greg Berhalter if you want them. Yet, Christian Pulisic, he's like, we're all behind Greg. He's built an incredible culture. We want to move forward with him. Even got a guy like Ricardo Pepi, who was one of the players I am talking about, one of the players who's left off the roster, is like, I support Greg Berhalter. Why is it that the players are so behind this, and how do you factor that into the analysis?
Well, let's start with Pepi, because what Pepi said after Greg Berhalter was named is what you're talking about.
Right.
2 months ago, he was talking about hanging up on Greg Berhalter when he told him that he didn't make the team and not having spoken to him since. I also think just generally, like, we have to take a grain of salt. If your general manager at 980 had left the company but might be coming back, and somebody in public asked you, hey, how do you feel about such and such? Well, if there's still a candidate to come back, you can't hammer the guy. You can't say, no, we're going to move on. You're putting your place and your relationship with a manager in jeopardy. That's not to say that there aren't some players who genuinely respect Berhalter, may have wanted to see him come back, may have thought, hey, this guy isn't as bad as what everybody out there is saying. We quite like him here, and we don't necessarily want to change. But I think it's too much to say that there was like universal player approval of this coach. We had Joe Scally, who was one of the guys that made the World Cup team but didn't play under Greg Berhalter in Qatar. And he told us flat out a couple weeks ago, before we knew Greg Berhalter was coming back, we need a coach that doesn't treat this like a club team, that treats this like an international team. And there's a huge difference there. And we all heard that and we were, oh, that's a shot at Greg Berhalter. So it was not unanimous. It was not even unanimous within U.S. Soccer. There was one member of the board of directors that didn't sign off on this. So there was, I wouldn't want to say internal fighting over this. I think they were much more on the same page internally than externally. But there was not unanimous support of Greg Berhalter, even at the Federation and even in that dressing room.
Sebastian Salazar, ESPN, of course, ESPN FC. You can check it out daily on ESPN.com and on the ESPN app. So that's an interesting comment to me, the Scally comment, right? Because there is also growth of obviously players, but of coaches over time. Like, do you think it's possible that Greg Berhalter learned from his mistakes as a manager in Qatar, and that he can actually be the right guy moving forward, and that the good things about him, because they did get out of the group stage. They did go further than the U.S. men had gone in a long time. He did complete the mission of getting them back to the World Cup and out of the group stage. So is it possible in your eyes, as someone who watches this incredibly closely, that they can grow on the good stuff that he brings and achieve the ultimate goal of genuinely competing on home soil in 2026?
Yeah, it's worth noting that a lot of the negative reaction that you're hearing to the Greg Berhalter hire is from the extremes, right? From what we all are, fans, but fan is short for fanatic. And so you get a really kind of overwhelmingly negative opinions of Greg Berhalter. If we look at his resume coolly and the work that he did, he took a program that missed a World Cup back to a World Cup and was the only team from this region to get out of the group phase at the World Cup. And if you look at how they played, they may not have scored a ton of goals, but they played very well, especially in the game against England. I think that's what everybody holds their hat on, that the U.S. went toe-to-toe with one of the teams that most people saw as the World Cup favorite. So there were plenty of footballing, soccer arguments to bring Greg Berhalter back. There's obviously the argument for continuity on top of that. He took a very, very young team, and where other managers would have said, you know what, let me mix in some veterans so we definitely survive qualifying. He said, nah, I'm rolling with these young guys. I'm a blood 'em. And to some extent, he can probably turn to the Federation now and say, hey, if I got you to the World Cup with kids who had never done it before and we performed decent, what do you think I could do now that they're established at the international level? And that's what he talked about in his press conference. Greg Berhalter, no matter what the internet tells you, is not a bad coach, and he's not a useless manager. The question here is he the best manager for this time in American soccer? Is he the guy to maximize this group of players? That, I don't think so. Can he get this group a little bit further than he did in Qatar, considering that it is a home World Cup? They're going to have a great draw. They're going to have a probably great path to at least the quarterfinals. Yeah, I think expectations should be raised, even if you don't think that Greg Berhalter is the perfect candidate. He's a good coach, and working with the same players more, he should be able to get even more out of the team.
So the other element of that is they're going to have better players, and we saw that over the weekend. I mean, the U.S. has been in search of a goal-scoring number 9 forever. Balogun comes in. He scores in the final. Like, what did we learn this weekend about this U.S. club winning their second straight Nations League title?
Yeah, there was, first of all, on Balogun, man, there was just so much hype. We were talking about it in soccer circles, trying to think the last time there was hype like this around a guy before he played for the national team. And it was a short list, like Christian Pulisic and then Freddie Adu is basically like how far back you have to go. Why is there that hype? So he chose between England, Nigeria, and the U.S., and he was pretty far along with England's program, which, of course, is better than the United States. On top of that, he's coming off a season where he scored 20 goals in a top 5 league in Europe. The list of Americans that had done that before Valerian Balogun, 0. So he's already kind of a historic prospect. And then to your point, what was the U.S. lacking at the World Cup, man? They had all these playmakers on the wings and in the middle, but they didn't have a guy to finish it off. They were rotating that striker position. And when you're talking about an attack, goals come from that spot. This guy has them. And you saw not only the goal that he scored in the final, good to bring up. Of course, goal scorers got to score goals. I think what you also saw in the whole tournament, right, this whole semifinal final, the game against Mexico, the game against Canada, he both starts, is that he's a real threat at the number 9. And he takes the other defense's attention, and that allows Christian Pulisic a little bit more space, Tim Weah a little bit more space, Gio Reyna a little bit more space. And you give guys of that talent space against the level of defenders that they're going against, especially in this region, the games we saw, Mexico and Canada, they're just going to light them up, bottom line. And so you saw a very dangerous Pulisic, a very dangerous Weah, a very dangerous Reyna. And on top of that, Balogun scoring. This attack is now by far the best in the region. And I think it can start to believe about being the type of an attack that can really create problems against good international teams when you get to the knockout rounds of, the World Cup in 2026, but don't forget, in 12 months, we got Copa America, which is North and South America, the continental tournament. That's going to be happening here in the States as well.
Yeah, and Sebastian Salazar is our guest, of course, ESPN FC. I guess that leads to like this big question. And if we're doing a soccer podcast, like this is not a question you're going to discuss because people listening to that know an answer. But like on a broadcast radio show, like this is the ultimate $1 million question or $1 billion question is like, okay, what does that mean on the world stage?
Right.
Because Pulisic is he's still like 24, I think, maybe 25. Reyna's 20, Balogun's 20, 21, like Weah's young. Like all these guys are still incredibly young. Musa is maybe he's turned 20 by now. He was 19 at the World Cup. Like they're so young, yet have experience, whether it's club, top 5 league in the world level, World Cup, or both. And I haven't even named like 3 other guys that also fit that bill. By the time we get to 2026, with these players gaining more experience, becoming more prominent in their clubs, and ultimately, Sebi, as you well know, there's more players coming in this pipeline that could be coming into the U.S. program. Can they legitimately get to a place where they're competing in Copa America next year and then are having, round of 16, semifinals, finals expectations in 2026?
Well, let's tackle Copa America first, because we can just look back at 2016, the last time that tournament was here. The U.S. made the semifinal, and that was a much different, not just U.S. team, but U.S. talent base, right? Where the guys were playing, what they'd achieved at club level. So playing a home tournament, you can kind of dream big. So I think for the Copa America, which is a good projection for the World Cup, we can safely say the way that they've played, they should be in the semifinals again at home. Now, what happened the last time they got to the semifinals? They got just destroyed by Argentina. And so the big question is, when you run up against an Argentina or a Brazil, who are going to be the class of that tournament, what's the gap? Is the gap such that over 90 minutes, maybe you could pull the upset? Or is the gap what it was in 2016, where there's just no chance, right? You're going to get washed off the field. I think the gap has shrunk dramatically. So I think for Copa America, you can say semifinals. And I think for the World Cup in 2026, because the U.S. will be a host, and that'll very much influence the group they fall in and therefore the draw, you can dream quarterfinals and potentially semifinals depending on the matchup. This is a generation that's going to be coming into its prime. They're already playing at some of the best clubs in the world. And to your point, there are kids right now that we don't really know about, that we're not really talking about on kind of the mainstream stage, 19, 20 years old, who are just breaking into major clubs in Europe. And if 1, 2, 3 of those players go on the Christian Pulisic track, now you're talking about a starting 11 of significant players in the biggest leagues in Europe. And if you've got that, and you've got a home World Cup, and you've got a coach that knows how to manage a tournament, which will be the big question, you can make a run. I think winning the World Cup in 2026 is still a little pie in the sky. But if you can make the semifinals, man, you're 180 minutes away. At that point, it's kind of like getting to the Final Four in March Madness. Like, you truly got to believe that you're playing well enough that everything can happen.
Right. And the other thing is like this group, as we just mentioned, is so young that you then look at, okay, well, where's this World Cup going to be in 2030, and can we compete then? As this group is probably young enough to play in at least 3 World Cups, the Pulisic's, et cetera, of the world. All right, speaking of World Cups, the next one is not 2026. It is in 30 days. It is in Australia, New Zealand. The women take the field. We are going to learn the U.S. roster tomorrow. It has been reported already by Meg Linehan at The Athletic that Aubrey Kingsbury will make the roster from the hometown Washington Spirit. Kelly O'Hara, former champion with the Spirit, is going to make the roster. And the big surprise is Savannah DeMello, who is a phenomenal midfielder, attacking midfielder for Racing Louisville. She's been one of the best players in the league all year, but hasn't really been a lot with the national team. And that narrows down to what else, can happen with that roster. So I know you did a video today that's all over ESPN.com, kind of the toughest decisions that Vlatko has to make. What to you are the 2 or 3 biggest ones that are going to impact how this team does in the other side or on the other side of the world?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah DeMello is a really interesting case because, like you said, she hadn't been with the national team in a while, but Vlatko Andonovski, the manager, was super clear, both publicly and privately, that NWSL play, right, your play with your club team, would not influence. It would dictate what happens at the World Cup, who will make the team, and then how many minutes they'll play. And so he's staying true to his word there. He's also acknowledging that he's got some problems in midfield, right? He hasn't really figured out what the best player combination or necessarily tactic is to get the best out of that American midfield. I think that's where the biggest questions are, Julie Ertz is this player from the past that is supposed to come in and kind of be a panacea, right? A fix-all for those issues. But this is a player that didn't play for the better part of 2 years since the Tokyo Olympics. So what kind of impact could she have? And, even her, she's been injured for quite a while with Angel City FC. I think up top, you're looking at a pretty clear pecking order. You've got Alex Morgan, who's going to have to lead the line. There's a lot of depth at those wing positions. There's some interesting choices there, but they're more depth. I think for me, the biggest questions are on that back line because the rest of the world is caught up and they have quality attackers. We know Becky Sauerbrunn, who is the 37-year-old kind of veteran leader of the team, is not going to be there. I know that's a big blow kind of in terms of what you think of, you want leadership in that defensive position. But I think it solves an issue for Vlatko Andonovski. He can now look at that center back and say, all right, you know what? I'm going to play my 2 youngest, most athletic players, maybe an Alana Cook, maybe a Naomi Girma, and kind of solidify the back line there. There's other players at the wide positions. I think Sofia Huerta's one for me. I really hope makes the team because she brings a lot going forward. Another player that's done great in the NWSL. But it's always a problem for the American coach. There's just an abundance of talent, and you got to do your best to try and pick the right players. I think most of his 11 is set. It's how does he manipulate those pieces, and what does he do in midfield? Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle are stars, but they're not playing like stars for the U.S. And so I think that's a big, big question for Vlatko Andonovski.
Yeah, of course. I'm horrendously biased towards Ashley Sanchez and what she can do because she's someone I consider a friend.
Yep.
But her, Savannah, there's so much talent in the youth movement. And obviously we'll see Andy Sullivan and where she fits in with Julie Ertz and all of that. But do you think that there's a major surprise that gets left off this roster? So far, the only one we know who's left off that's a surprise was Becky, but that was 100% injury related. But whether it's, hey, Rose Lavelle's not going to make this team because she hasn't played in weeks and, they're concerned about whether she's ready or for whatever other reason someone's not playing well in club. Do you think there's a big surprise of someone who's left off of this roster?
I think there's going to be some heartbreak. I look at a couple players from the National Women's Soccer League that have really proven themselves, and that's like Lynn Williams and Midge Purse. And those players both have kind of the same tools, and that's just straight line speed that you can't really coach and that you need now that Mallory, formerly known as Pugh, now Swanson, is out. That's just a huge blow for this American team. So you're going to need somebody on the other side. It could be Trinity Rodman for all our Washington Spirit fans. But I think one of those 2 players is going to be left off. I think Lynn Williams has 6 goals right now in the NWSL. She's top 5 in scoring. So it would be really shocking to see her left off. But at the same point, Midge Purse deserves to be in a major international tournament. So I think that wide position has always been really deep, but that's where you get those tough calls, and good players are going to be left off like they frequently have been for the U.S.
For sure. All right. We have reached our time. 2, we can hear Father Duty is calling in the background.
Yes.
So we will let you go. Sebi, always appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll be catching up soon.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
You got it. Sebastian Salazar, everybody, with us here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back to the Bradley Beal trade to wrap up the final half hour here on the Team 980.
Daniel
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Real things, real people said into real microphones coming up at the quarter hour at 6:45. The same time it comes up every day. I don't know why that just stumbled me up. I just battering rammed the first 30 seconds of the show today. We caught a nice wave. We were going smooth. I got slightly distracted, and then bang. There we are again. I also got slightly distracted during the break because I got a DM about from on Instagram from someone who listens to the show and brought up something that I haven't talked about this Bradley Beal deal yet that I think is worth addressing. And I'm gonna put a wet blanket on a lot of conspiracy theory nonsense here, but it's enough reality, and it's just worth actually parsing out, which is the fact that the son of Bradley Beal's agent, Mark Bartelstein, I believe it's Josh Bartelstein, is the CEO of the Phoenix Suns. So the team that just, and through the eyes of many people, bamboozled the Wizards out of their franchise player for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and a bunch of second-round picks and some pick swaps for a player that would have gotten like 3 or 4 first-rounders not that long ago and who had a no-trade clause. You're telling me that the relationship between his dad, the agent, and the CEO of the team he's going to, that there's not something fishy there? No. No, yes, I am. I'm telling you that there's not something fishy there. There's no fish in this equation. And I realize that it, to continue the fish analogy to an extent, doesn't pass the smell test because you're like, of course it does. But there's a pretty straightforward reason why the Wizards got screwed to the extent they got screwed here. And that they made the deal that they made. The no-trade clause. Bradley Beal had a say of where he went. Once he narrowed it down to one location, what are you going to do? You're lucky you got what you got. Because the Suns could have just gone, you're going to take the salary that we give you because we have to. You're not getting any pick swaps. You're not getting any draft picks because you can't afford to not move forward. And that is the point that seems to get lost in this. And so I think his name is Ant, who DM'd me, and maybe he's listening to the show right now. But he's like, you're telling me you couldn't get Campaign, who's one of the few players. I don't even know if he's actually even on the roster. Let me even double check this math real quick in terms of where he is or whether he's one of the free agents that they're going to try to re-sign and you do like a sign and trade. But that actually is not possible either. Let's see. We need Cameron Payne on Spotrac so we can get the contract information. He's got a partially guaranteed deal, so he would have been an ideal type of guy to potentially acquire. But he's useful for the Suns. He might be their starting point guard if they want to go with a lineup of DeAndre Ayton at center, the 3 obviously highly paid players, we'll call them, the 3 stars, and then Campaign. He might be their starting point guard. So no, you don't get him. You get Landry Shamet because we said so. You can't tell me we couldn't have gotten DeAndre Ayton. They don't want DeAndre Ayton. They probably could have had DeAndre Ayton because the Suns don't want DeAndre Ayton either. But the thing is, they didn't want the long-term money. And so I think what's hard to swallow for Wizards fans is that this deal wasn't actually terrible for the Wizards. The idea that you can just hit select delete on 3 years of Bradley Beal's contract, which is what happened. He had 4 remaining. They had to match the money for this year. But next year, all of it is gone. When you had committed all of that and were completely inflexible, is valuable. There is a price to pay, literally and figuratively, for taking on long-term money, which is why they didn't want Ayton. Is DeAndre Ayton going to help you win basketball games over the next couple of years? Maybe, but he restricts you from the flexibility to acquire players that are better than DeAndre Ayton. So you don't want DeAndre Ayton. He's also been a bit of a malcontent. He's not a build-around type of player, and he's really expensive. So why you don't like if DeAndre Ayton was being acquired as like a third or fourth piece, okay. He was the third best player on a team that made the finals a couple years ago that Giannis ultimately smashed by the end. But they were a Western Conference champion with Devin Booker and Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton. But that's not what you're after in this deal. What you're after is flexibility. What you're after is the ability to take on money from, let's say, a DeAndre Ayton type of player, but attached to it a first-round pick. So if there's another player in the league who signs a deal that gets kind of forced into, right? Because that's the thing with DeAndre Ayton, too. The only reason he's got his contract is because the Pacers really wanted him, and they were willing to go all in to try. And they signed him to an offer sheet. He became a restricted free agent. The Suns were like, oh, God, we don't want to pay him that. But they have to, or they lose him for nothing. And so they matched the offer sheet last offseason, and DeAndre Ayton stays with the Suns. But he's not, like, you want to trade the overpaid guy for another overpaid guy? No. Trade him for the ability to go find a bargain. Trade him for the ability to go acquire an overpaid guy with something that's a bonus for your troubles, a.k.a. a first-round pick. So the idea that they got some sweetheart deal, the Suns got a sweetheart deal because the agent driving it is the dad of the CEO of the team that got the sweetheart deal, is giving that relationship too much credit when really it's just a matter of the market. Is supply and demand. There's one Bradley Beal, that is the supply. His demand was to go to the Phoenix Suns, and really it's actually the other way around. Beal is the teams that Beal is going to are supply. Right? So if he had been going to 3 teams, okay, well now the Wizards get to set the state of the demand. They get to say, okay, Miami's offering this, Sacramento's offering this, Phoenix is offering this. Do any of you want to up your offer? Okay, no, we'll go to the best one. Instead, it was Beal who said, I want to go to Phoenix because it is the closest I can get to both a contender and where my wife wants to be, because her family is from California, and that is important to us as grown adults who think about these things with our 3 children. And the Wizards have no choice. So the conspiracy, whether you want to go as far as saying conspiracy theory, you just want to say it's a little fishy. Is it weird? Yeah. But guess what? If Michael Winger turns around and helps facilitate a trade to the Clippers for Chris Paul, people are going to be like, oh, well, they're buddy-buddy. Like, that's the league. Everybody worked for somebody. Michael Winger left the Thunder, went to the Clippers, and then helped engineer the Paul George trade. Like, that's the league. Is it always father-son? No. It could be mentor-mentee. It could be best friends. There are brothers in different front offices. Like, that is the nature of a league that is very small, an ecosystem that is fairly closed. You just don't have a lot of people that don't know each other and that haven't worked together on something. You don't want to generate a bunch of bad relationships because there's only 30 teams, and you don't want to limit who you can trade with or not based off whether or not you like them, so you tend to get along with everyone to an extent. Is it a little more elevated? Is it a little nepotistic, if you will, between a father and son? Sure. But that had no bearing on the return the Wizards got. The Wizards literally got everything they could out of the Suns. The Suns' cupboard was bare. They went in and collected the crumbs and said, okay, fine, we now have our flexibility moving forward. Speaking of things the Wizards have said, this time literally, not proverbially, I didn't get a chance to play this bite earlier from Michael Winger. a couple weeks ago, he joined, obviously, Russell and I on the day of his introductory press conference. And I asked him about kind of the reality that they were in, that the team had not done well in the previous years. And so is it, when you say, all options are on the table, what does that actually mean? And there was a phrase that Winger had used in an interview with the Washington Post that kind of prompted this question that sometimes, I forget the exact quote right now, but basically action then spurs action. Sometimes you have to do something to spur along progress. You have to just rip the Band-Aid off. And I asked Winger to explain that quote, and this was part of his answer.
I mean, I guess to put it bluntly, the team as constituted hasn't performed. Yeah. Hasn't performed up to the level that they themselves probably wanted to perform. And running it back as constituted doesn't seem like a very wise pursuit. And so sometimes making that change accelerates the progress. There's a team in the finals right now that at its core doesn't look a lot different than it did a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. But they made a couple of tweaks in the offseason, and now they're in the finals, up 2-1. So sometimes it's just those incremental changes that can have pretty substantial results, and that's really what I meant.
So, of course, he in that leaves open the possibility at the time a couple of weeks ago of tweaking and whatever. But at the end of the day, the first part's the most important.
I mean, I guess to put it bluntly, the team as constituted hasn't performed. Yeah. Hasn't performed up to the level that they themselves probably wanted to perform. And running it back as constituted doesn't seem like a very wise pursuit.
Yeah. That was the moment I knew. What are we tweaking here? And it does kind of make me think, and this is just a thought exercise I went through. I don't think they'll actually do this, but I don't know. Could they bring back Kuzma and Porzingis and the tweak is actually Beal? They could see what they do in the draft and, do they actually like the complementary pieces and feel like with the added flexibility that they could go get a star? Probably not, because who's out there, who's available. And as we talked about with Keith Smith earlier, and we've talked about over the last couple of days, their ability to acquire someone in a trade is extremely limited because they cannot offer multiple first-round picks currently in a trade. So, long roundabout way of saying, the writing has been on the wall the whole time. It was just a matter of them getting in the room to read it. And ultimately, of course, they get boxed in by the no trade clause, and we see where it lands. But we are at a place now that was inevitable, and we'll continue to break this down as the pieces move over the next couple of days, what happens with Chris Paul, et cetera. And that's kind of where I want to spend the time on the show tomorrow is what does the build actually look like from here? What does it look like for the Wizards to build a contender, and who has done something like this before to tear it down and then become successful? So we start to look ahead of the immediate future and, of course, the long-term future tomorrow, and we will be a day before the NBA draft, so we will continue to preview that as well. Thursday, NBA Draft Day, we're broadcasting live from Capital One Arena. Our draft show officially starts at 6:30. I will be with Linnell and Chris Naki from 6:30 to 7, and then the boys will take things from there. Simulcast on both here, the Team 980, and 106.7, The Fan. All right, quick look at what's trending. Then when we get back, it's time for Real Things Real People Said into real microphones.
Here's what's trending.
coming up here on a Tuesday. Essig, you just never hopped in the stream today, so you're just going to be a disembodied voice for the whole show.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm good with being just a voice in the cloud.
Okay, that works. Now I don't know where to look though. Do I look at this? Do I look intently at the screen, or do I look? I think I'm just gonna look at you over here, because that's weird. Because otherwise it feels like I'm ignoring you.
Well, funnily enough, because you got the TV above you, it kind of looks like I'm looking directly at you as you look into the screen. Another one of the behind the scenes.
Yeah. The problem is,
it's not good for you.
Yeah,
you're just looking at yourself.
I'm looking at myself on a screen, and it feels like I'm ignoring you. So I'm gonna look over here.
I appreciate it.
When Russell makes mistakes on the show, does he just relentlessly mock himself like I do, or does he just keep it moving? Like, how does that work? Or does he get lost for the entire show? Because that would be my guess, is that entire segments get just absolutely derailed by something simple that could have just been ignored.
So I guess my question is, what would you entail a mistake in this situation?
Say something, not like you cuss, but like you stumble over something. You don't deliver something as smoothly as you had anticipated. You have a human moment.
You see, the human moments though are where Chris Russell really thrives. We had a bit today where we were just talking about the fact that he wears all black because he likes to spill on himself, and how he was on a 2-day streak of not spilling on himself, but was on a 3-day streak of forgetting to turn his mic on. So he is a very human person and tends to kind of just get in, get out of the mistakes. He's pretty quick with it.
Okay, that's good. He is known to just beat himself up. So I worry about him sometimes. Is basically the crux of what's going on here.
He's doing
Russell,
all right.
If you're listening, I worry, buddy. I worry. All right. We have one bite for real things. It is long and there's a lot of bleeps. Matt, I told you I would go and double check. I didn't get a chance to. So speaking of cussing, you're gonna have to have your finger on the dump button here. But we're gonna go through this slowly. See how it goes. It is time for real things. Real people said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5-11. Not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
All right. So there's a discussion about basketball players and trades and stuff that was happening. It had to be on someone's podcast, and it was between Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Kevin Garnett swears a lot. It's just like a general rule. I also tend to agree with his points here, but that's not really the point of the clip. Ladies and gentlemen, the big ticket and the truth.
First off, New Orleans, calm down. Calm down. First off, Zion is a human being. He's going to put his pants in one leg, and he's going to put his pants in his leg in the other leg. You understand?
So far,
look,
so good.
Happens, and he's going to go through something. He's a growing young man. If you thought he was going to go through this whole and nothing happened to the kid, that's not how it works. It's not how life is working. You understand?
Ooh, I think
if you listen, first off, Zion is a generational talent. Okay? Was patient with Embiid, patient with Giannis. You know what I'm saying?
I don't really agree with he a generational talent.
I have to pause it for a moment just to comment. Actually, no, I don't. I'm gonna allow it to keep going.
Generational talent.
You crazy. You ain't seen no motherfucker 285 this powerful, this agile. You ain't seen nothing like this, dog. Stop, man. Stop, man.
Sean Kemp.
Stop, man.
Sean Kemp.
Stop, man. Stop.
Charles Barkley.
Stop, man.
I'm saying you asked me. I'm telling you,
Charles Barkley was not this explosive. He was explosive. He was not this explosive.
Not like okay.
Stop,
Zion,
man.
All right. What about Sean Kemp?
He was not this explosive.
So you saying Zion more athletic?
I said more explosive.
By the way, I will just interject real quick to say the idea that former players are better at this than some of us who didn't play. I need to save this clip and just present it as Exhibit A as to why just because you played doesn't mean you're better at talking into this here microphone as some of us who maybe went to journalism school and learned about sports through not playing. But continue arguing, old men. Go ahead.
All right, same thing. More explosive than Sean.
Yeah. I love Sean Kemp.
I ain't seen the same dunk-ons like I seen from.
Ain't nobody getting none of that. We ain't got no dunk, man. Them grown men he dunking on. Dumb grown men. Ain't no grown men in the no, man. Ain't nobody getting in the ways of Zion. Who get in the way?
That sounds like a biblical something. The ways of Zion. Right now, what he's going through on the internet is biblical in another sense, but we're not gonna touch that with the 10-foot pole.
Yeah, them men Sean Kemp was dunking on with daddies and old men and trying to block. Yeah. Ain't nobody in this generation jumping with dude.
I love that Kevin Garnett's just like trashing Kevin Garnett, old head who absolutely has probably trashed the younger generation at some point, just destroying the early 90s NBA.
Yeah. You trying to say I'm saying Zion, I've never seen explosiveness like this. Not saying that Sean Kemp wasn't explosive. I'm saying Zion is probably the most explosive player
I've seen. He in the Sean Kemp mode though.
What a dumb conversation we just made you listen to. Here's the thing. Here's an actual Zion analysis in less time than whatever that was, while incredibly humorous and a perfect clip for this very silly radio segment. Zion Williamson played in like 5 games this year. It was more than that. It was like 10, 20, something like that. And when he did, he was one of the 5 best players in the league. Like, the explosive stuff is cool. It helps his cause. But that dude is a freaking ridiculous basketball player. The best player that's available this offseason, remotely, is Victor Wembanyama. The second best one, Zion Williamson. The only reason that Charlotte isn't running to New Orleans to send the pick to them to acquire Zion is either because Zion is not available or because of the concerns about him off the court and the fact that he's only played in, I think it's 114 games in 4 years. When it comes to being a basketball player, Zion Williamson is still one of the 10 best players in the league easily when healthy. Unfortunately, when healthy for him has been basically never, and thus that statement doesn't really matter as much as it should. But let's not pretend it's about who's more explosive or whatever the hell they just did. Okay, BetMGM tonight is next. We'll see you tomorrow on The Hoffman Show.
Hey, I'm Craig Hoffman.
And I'm Logan Paulson.
And together we host the Take Command